The clink of crystal against crystal is a sound that usually signifies celebration. It is a sharp, resonant chime that cuts through the ambient noise of a room, promising a toast to good health, a new marriage, or a business triumph. But as I stood in the darkened hallway of my own home in Beacon Hill, Massachusetts, that sound made my blood run cold. It was the sound of my children, Julian and Cara, drinking the Macallan 25-year-old scotch I had been saving for my silver wedding anniversary. That anniversary would never come. My wife, Alina, had passed away 4 years ago from a sudden aneurysm. The bottle had remained in the liquor cabinet, a dusty sentinel of a life that was cut short. For my children to open it now was a sacrilege. But it was what they said next that turned my grief into a cold, hard rage. "To the diagnosis," Julian said. Before I tell you what I did next, please like and subscribe to follow this story. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of empathy. He was 32 years old, a man who had spent his life drifting from one failed venture to another, always cushioned by my checkbook. And to Dr. Evans, who finally gave us the ammunition we need. To the judge, Cara replied. She was 28, a real estate agent who was more interested in her Instagram following than her closing rates. Hearing is set for next Thursday. Once the order is signed, we can finally list this mausoleum. I already have a developer interested in the lot. We tear it down, put up condos, and we split $4 million easy. And Dad, Julian asked, I heard the liquid pour into the glass. The glug 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 sound seemed deafening in the silence of the house. Sunrise Meadows, Cara said dismissively. It's in the Berkshires, out of sight, out of mind. They have a memory care unit. He won't even know where he is in 6 months. The drugs will see to that. I stood there, pressing my back against the wainscoting to keep from sliding to the floor. I was wearing my pajamas at 2 in the afternoon. My hands were trembling. For the last 6 months I had believed I was losing my mind. I had believed the fog that shrouded my thoughts was the onset of early dementia. I had believed the stumbling, the forgetfulness, the hours of lost time were symptoms of a decaying brain. But in that moment the fog lifted. It didn't drift away, it was burned away by the adrenaline of betrayal. They weren't mourning my decline, they were engineering it. I realized then that I was not a patient, I was a target. To understand the gravity of this moment, you have to understand the year that preceded it. After Alina died, I threw myself into my work. I was, the senior partner at Vance and Sterling, a structural engineering firm that handled some of the most complex infrastructure projects in New England. I understood load-bearing walls, I understood stress fractures, I understood that if you apply enough pressure to any material it will break, but grief is a different kind of pressure. It is internal, it is constant. I was lonely. I was sleeping poorly. 6 months ago I had a minor fall at a job site. I tripped over a cable and hit my head. It was a mild concussion, nothing the ER was worried about, but Julian and Cara had swooped in like concerned angels. Dad, you can't live alone anymore, Cara had said, her eyes wide with faux concern. You're forgetting things, you're unstable. We're going to stay with you, Julian had insisted, just for a while to help out. They brought in their own doctor, Dr. Evans. He wasn't my regular internist. He was a concierge doctor Julian knew from his country club circle, a man with a gleaming smile and a prescription pad that never ran dry. It's just for the anxiety, Arthur, Dr. Evans had told me during his first house call, and to help you sleep. The brain needs rest to heal from the concussion. The pills were small and blue, lorazepam, and another one, a yellow oval, quetiapine asterisk. I took them because I trusted them. I took them because I was tired of missing Alina. And slowly, systematically, I began to disappear. The days blurred. I would wake up at noon, feeling like my limbs were made of lead. I would try to read a blueprint, but the lines would swim before my eyes. I would start a sentence and forget the end of it. See, Dad, Julian would say, patting my shoulder with a condescending rhythm. You're confused again, you forgot you already ate lunch. I did, I would ask, panic rising in my chest. Yes, an hour ago, it's okay. Dr. Evans says this is part of the progression. Gaslighting is a terrible word. It implies a subtle manipulation. This was not subtle, this was a demolition. They were dismantling my reality brick by brick. They took my car keys, they took my credit cards so I wouldn't lose them. They took my dignity. But standing in that hallway, hearing them toast to my destruction with my dead wife's scotch, the chemicals in my blood seem. Neutralize. The engineer in me woke up. I analyzed the data. 1, they needed a diagnosis to get a court order. 2, they needed a court order to control my assets. 3, they needed me compliant and confused to get the diagnosis. The conclusion was inescapable. I wasn't sick. I was drugged. I retreated to my bedroom, moving with a stealth I didn't know I possessed. I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I opened the medicine cabinet. There they were, the little bottles of poison. I poured them into the toilet. I watched the blue and yellow pills swirl away into the sewer, then I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was gaunt. I hadn't shaved in 3 days, my eyes looked haunted, I looked like a victim. No more, I whispered to my reflection. The next 72 hours were a physical crucible. Withdrawal from high-dose sedatives and antipsychotics is not something to be taken lightly. My body revolted. I had tremors that rattled my teeth. I had sweats that soaked through the mattress. I had headaches that felt like a railroad spike being driven into my temple, but I hid it, I had to. If they knew I was lucid, they might accelerate their timeline. They might force more pills down my throat, so I played the part. When Kara brought me a tray of lukewarm soup, I let my hand shake so much I spilled it on the duvet. "Oh, Dad," she sighed, cleaning it up with aggressive wipes. "You're such a mess. This is why you need professional help." "I'm sorry, Martha," I mumbled, using her mother's name. "I'm Kara, Dad, God, you're gone." I watched her eyes. There was no sadness there, only annoyance. She checked the nightstand to make sure I had taken the meds she left. I had palmed them earlier and flushed them. "Good boy," she said, seeing the empty cup. By the fourth day, the sky cleared. I woke up at 6:00 a.m. The sun was streaming through the bay window. I looked at the clock. I calculated the time difference between Boston and London instantly in my head. I recited the periodic table. I remembered the code to the wall safe behind the painting in the study, 1940-508. My mind was back. It was sharp, hungry, and furious. I waited until they left the house. They usually went to a spin class and then brunch around 10:00 a.m. As soon as the Audi pulled out of the driveway, I was moving. I dressed in a charcoal suit. It hung loose on my frame, but I tightened the belt. I put on a crisp white shirt. I tied a Windsor knot. I didn't call a cab. That would leave a digital trail on the family account. I walked. I walked 2 miles to the Government Center T station. The fresh air filled my lungs. The pain in my legs from the walk felt like penance for my months of weakness. I went to the office of Sterling and Howe, not my engineering firm, my personal lawyers. Robert Sterling was an old friend, a man I had known since we played rugby together at UMass. When I walked into his office, the receptionist gasped. "Mr. Vance, we heard. Well, Julian called. He said you were bedridden." "Julian exaggerates," I said, my voice gravelly but steady. "Is Robert in?" Robert came out of his office, his jaw dropping. "Arthur, my God, you look like you've been in a gulag." "I have been," I said. "I need your help, Bob, and I need a neurologist. A real one, not on anyone's payroll." We spent the next 3 hours strategizing. Robert was furious. He wanted to call the police immediately. "No," I said. "Police means a welfare check. It means my word against theirs. They have Dr. Evans' reports. They have months of documented decline. If the cops show up, Julian shows them the paperwork, and I look like a paranoid dementia patient off his meds. They'll institutionalize me for a 72-hour hold, and in that time they'll pump me full of drugs again." "So what's the play?" Robert asked. "The hearing is on Thursday," I said. "We let them walk into court thinking they've won. We let them testify under oath, and then we drop the hammer." "We need proof," Robert said. "Scientific proof. Get me an appointment with Dr. Aris Thorne," I said. "He's the head of neurology at Beit Israel. He consulted on the big dig trauma cases. He's unimpeachable. He has a 6-month waiting list." "Call him," I said. "Tell him it's Arthur Vance. Tell him I found the structural flaw in his vacation home's retaining wall in 2005 and didn't charge him for the fix." Robert smiled. "I'll make the call." The next few days were a master class in deception. I had to live with my executioners. I had to eat dinner with them. I had to listen to them talk about me as if I were already dead. I snuck out to see Dr. Thorne while they were at the gym. The testing was exhaustive. MRI scans, SPECT scans to check blood flow, cognitive batteries that lasted 4 hours. "Arthur," Dr. Thorne said on the second day, looking at the imaging, "your brain is beautiful, a little shrunken from dehydration maybe, but structurally, you're firing on all cylinders. No plaques, no T. angles, no Lewy bodies. You do not have dementia." "And the symptoms?" "Toxicology came back," he said, handing me a sheet. "You had enough benzos and antipsychotics in your system to tranquilize a horse. The confusion wasn't disease, it was poisoning. Will you come to court?" I wouldn't miss it. Thursday arrived, October 24th. The rain was lashing against the windows of the brownstone, a fitting backdrop. Julian came into my room. "Time to go, Dad, put on your shoes." He spoke to me like a toddler. "Where are we going?" I asked, keeping my eyes dull. "Just a meeting to make sure you're safe." We drove to the courthouse in silence. Kara was checking her makeup in the visor mirror. "Do I look okay?" she asked Julian. "I want to look sympathetic but capable." "You look great, sis. Guardianship looks good on you." My stomach turned. We entered the courtroom. It was one of the older rooms in the Suffolk County Courthouse, smelling of floor wax and history. Judge Henderson was presiding. He was a terrifying man. Known as the Hammer, he had zero tolerance for nonsense. He looked over his glasses as we entered. Julian and Kara sat at the plaintiff's table with their lawyer, a slick operator named Mr. Greaves. I sat at the defendant's table, alone. Robert was waiting in the gallery. We had agreed he would only step forward once the trap was sprung. In the matter of the guardianship of Arthur Vance, the clerk called out. Mr. Greaves stood up. Your Honor, this is a heartbreaking case. My clients, Julian and Kara Vance, are here out of love. Their father, a brilliant man, has succumbed to rapid-onset Alzheimer's. He is unable to care for himself. He wanders. He is aggressive. He cannot manage his finances. We have submitted the affidavit of his primary care physician, Dr. Evans, attesting to his incapacity. And the relief sought, Judge Henderson asked. Full guardianship of the person and conservatorship of the estate, Greaves said, to allow for the liquidation of assets to pay for his specialized care at a secure facility. Does Mr. Vance have counsel? The judge asked, looking at me. I was staring at my hands, hunching forward. He refused counsel, Your Honor, Greaves lied. He doesn't understand the proceedings. I see. The judge sighed. Well, let's hear from the children. Julian took the stand. He squeezed out a few tears. He told stories about me leaving the stove on, a lie. He told stories about me forgetting his name, a lie. It's so hard to see him like this, Julian sniffed. We just want him safe. Kara took the stand next. She talked about the finances. He's making irrational transfers, she claimed. He stopped paying bills. The estate is bleeding. We need control to stop the hemorrhaging. Judge Henderson looked at me. Mr. Vance, do you have anything to say? This was it. I stood up. I didn't tremble. I didn't brace myself on the table. I buttoned my suit jacket with a sharp snap. I raised my head and looked directly at the judge. Yes, Your Honor, I said. My voice filled the room. It was the voice I used to command construction crews of 200 men. I have quite a lot to say. Julian and Kara froze, their heads whipped around. Mr. Greaves claims I do not understand the proceedings, I continued. On the contrary. I understand that this is a petition under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 190B. I understand that the standard of proof is clear and convincing evidence. And I understand that perjury is a felony. Objection, Greaves shouted, panicked. The respondent is, he's having an episode. Sit down, counselor, Judge Henderson barked. He looked at me with intense interest. Go on, Mr. Vance. For the past 6 months, Your Honor, I have been chemically restrained. I was prescribed a cocktail of haloperidol and lorazepam by Dr. Evans, a man I had never met before my children brought him to my home. These drugs induce cognitive impairment. When I stopped taking them 5 days ago, my dementia miraculously evaporated. This is absurd, Julian yelled. He's paranoid, that's a symptom. I have proof, I said. Mr. Sterling. Robert stepped out from the gallery. He walked through the bar, carrying a thick accordion file. Robert Sterling, representing Mr. Vance, he said. Your Honor, I have here a sworn affidavit from Dr. Aris Thorne, Chief of Neurology at Beit Israel. It details a complete clean bill of cognitive health as of yesterday afternoon. I also have a toxicology report from a hair follicle test confirming the presence of high-dose antipsychotics in Mr. Vance's system over a 6-month period. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Henderson took the file. He flipped through it. His face grew darker and darker. He looked at the toxicology report. He looked at Dr. Evans' flimsy affidavit. These are grave accusations, the judge said. We have conflicting medical reports. Test me, I sighed. The judge looked at me. Excuse me, test me, I repeated. If I have dementia, I shouldn't be able to recall details. I shouldn't be able to handle complex logic. You have my financial records there, the ones my children submitted. Ask me anything. The judge leaned back. A small smile played on his lips. He liked this. All right, Mr. Vance, he said. Let's look at the real estate portfolio. You own a commercial property at 100 Seaport Boulevard. I do, I said. It's a mixed-use development, structural steel frame on a pile foundation. We completed it in 2019. The ground lease is held by the Massport Authority. The air rights are ours. The current occupancy rate is 94%. What is the debt service coverage ratio? The judge asked, a technical financial question most people wouldn't know. 135, I answered instantly. Based on a net operating income of $2.4 million and an annual debt service of $1.7 million. The judge nodded. He flipped a page. Tell me about your estate planning. My will was drafted in 2015, I said. It leaves the bulk of the estate to my wife, Alina. Since her passing, it falls to a residuary clause splitting the assets between Julian and Kara. I turned to look at them. They were pale, trembling. However, I continued, that will include a forfeiture clause. Anyone who challenges the validity of the will or attempts to defraud the estate is automatically disinherited. And the scotch? The judge asked. He was looking at a transcript Robert had slipped into the file, a transcript of my recollection of the hallway event. The Macallan 25, I said softly. My children opened it last Tuesday. They toasted to my diagnosis. They called it the golden ticket. They discussed selling my home and putting me in a facility in the Berkshires so they could split 4 million easy. That's a lie, Kara screamed. He's making it up. I have the receipt for the scotch, I said calmly. It was purchased in 1999, and if you subpoena the GPS data from their phones, it will place them in my study at 2:15 p.m. last Tuesday. Judge Henderson closed the file. The sound was like a gunshot. He looked at Julian and Kara. He looked at them with a contempt that would wither a plant. In all my years on the bench, the judge said quietly, I have never seen such a naked display of greed. You didn't just try to steal his money. You didn't just try to steal his house. You tried to steal his mind. You tried to erase him. He turned to the clerk. The petition is denied with prejudice. The temporary guardianship is vacated immediately. Mr. Vance is restored to full legal capacity. He wasn't finished. Mr. Greaves, he said to their lawyer, you are going to report yourself to the Bar Association for ethics violations, or I will do it for you. Yes, Your Honor, Greaves whispered. And as for you too, the judge pointed at Julian and Kara. I am referring this transcript and the toxicology report to the district attorney's office. This looks like conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse to me. Get out of my courtroom. I walked out of the courthouse into the rain. It felt like a baptism. Julian and Kara ran after me. Dad, please. Julian grabbed my arm. We were misled by Dr. Evans. He told us you were sick. We were scared. I pulled my arm away. I looked at him. I looked at the son I had taught to ride a bike, the son I had bilated out of jail when he was 20, and I saw a stranger. You have until sundown to remove your belongings from my house, I said. I am changing the locks. I am canceling the credit cards. I am selling the condo you live in, Julian. It's in my name. You can't do that, Kara cried. I have nowhere to go. You're a real estate agent, I said coldly. Find a rental. You can pay for it with the money you earn from a job. Dad, please, Julian sobbed. I love you. No, I said, you don't. You love my money, and now you have neither. I turned and walked to Robert's car. I didn't look back. The aftermath was swift. I didn't press charges, but the DA did. They took a plea deal to avoid prison, probation, community service, and a permanent record. Dr. Evans wasn't so lucky. He is currently serving 5 years in federal prison for insurance fraud and illegal prescribing practices. I returned to my firm. The work was my salvation. I designed a new library for the city, a building of glass and light. I sat in my study 6 months later. The cabinet was open. The empty bottle of Macallan was gone. In its place was a bottle of Lagavulin. I poured a glass. I toasted to the empty room. To clarity, I said, I was alone, but I was me, and that was enough. But satisfaction is a fleeting nutrient. It provides a burst of energy, a warmth in the belly, but it does not sustain you for the long winter of a solitary life. As the warmth of the Lagavulin settled in my chest, the silence of the house began to press in on me again. It was different now. Though, it was no longer the menacing silence of a conspiracy, but the hollow silence of a vacancy. The structural void, as we might call it in my trade, space that serves no purpose other than to define the distance between load-bearing elements. I sat there for a long time, watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of light from the hallway. Enough was a brave word to say to an empty room, but making it true was a different engineering challenge entirely. The weeks following the court case had been a blur of administrative violence. That is the only way to describe it. I didn't just change the locks, I had the entire security system ripped out and replaced. I couldn't bear to look at the keypad where Julian had known the code, where he had punched in the numbers with the casual entitlement of a prince entering his fiefdom. I hired a specialized team to sweep the house for bugs, cameras, or digital trackers. It cost me $15,000 to be told my home was clean, but the peace of mind was worth the price of a luxury sedan. Then came the purge of objects. I walked through the house, room by room, with a roll of black garbage bags. I didn't donate their things. Donation implies charity, and I had no charity left in me. I threw away Julian's golf clubs, which I had paid for. I threw away Kara's collection of designer handbags that she had stored in the guest room closets, handbags purchased with supplementary credit cards I had unknowingly authorized during my medicated haze. In the guest bathroom, I found a bottle of cologne Julian had left behind. The scent hit me like a physical blow, a mixture of sandalwood and arrogance. For a moment my hand trembled and the old panic flared. Is this a symptom? Am I shaking because of the disease? I had to grip the sink, staring at myself in the mirror, reciting the calculations for shear force in a concrete beam until the tremor subsided. It was the PTSD Dr. Thorne had warned me. The body remembers the poisoning even after the mind has cleared. The neurological pathways of fear had been etched deep by 6 months of gaslighting. I wasn't just recovering from drugs, I was recovering from a systematic dismantling of my reality. I threw the cologne in the trash. The glass shattered. It was a satisfying sound, but the hardest work was outside the house. Beacon Hill is a village. It is a village of cobblestones, gas lamps, and old money, and like any village, it runs on gossip. For months the narrative had been established: poor Arthur Vance, losing his marbles, the children are saints for taking care of him. Rewriting that narrative required a public campaign. I chose the annual gala for the Historic Preservation Society as my battlefield. It was 3 weeks after the hearing. Robert Sterling advised against it. "Give it time, Arthur," he had said. "Let the dust settle." "Dust settles on graves, Bob," I had replied. "I'm not dead yet." I wore my tuxedo, it fit better now. I had gained back 10 pounds of the weight I'd lost during the treatment, and I no longer looked like a scarecrow dressed for a funeral. I walked into the ballroom at the Four Seasons, head high, eyes scanning the room. The reaction was immediate, conversations stalled, heads turned. I saw the whispers ripple through the crowd like wind through wheat. I made a beeline for Harrison Cole, the chairman of the board at the country club. Harrison was a man who had played golf with me for 20 years. He was also the man who had solemnly nodded when Julian told him I was too unfit to maintain my membership. "Arthur," Harrison said, his smile tight, his eyes darting around as if looking for an exit. We didn't expect to see you." "I imagine not," I said, my voice projecting just enough to be heard by the surrounding circle. "I imagine you expected I'd be in a memory care unit in the Berkshires by now. Isn't that what Julian told you?" "Well, he mentioned you were struggling," Harrison stammered. "We were all so concerned." "Concern is an active verb, Harrison," I said, picking a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "Concern involves checking in, asking questions, visiting. I don't recall seeing you at the house." "We didn't want to intrude," his wife Betsy chimed in, clutching her pearls. "Kara said you were violent. She said you didn't know anyone." "Kara," I said, savoring the name like a piece of gristle I was about to spit out, "is currently serving 2 years of probation for fraud and elder abuse, and I am quite capable of knowing exactly who my friends are and who they aren't." I took a sip of the champagne. It was dry, cold, and excellent. "It's good to see you, Harrison," I said, and then I walked away. I spent the rest of the night circulating. I didn't talk about the betrayal in detail. I didn't ask for pity. I talked about structural integrity. I talked about the new library project. I corrected a developer on the zoning laws for the Seaport District. Demonstrated with every sentence, every recalled date, every sharp, witty retort that Arthur Vance was back. By the time I left, the narrative had shifted. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the shark who had bitten back. Asterisk work became my sanctuary, but even there the ground was treacherous. The firm, Vance and Sterling, had suffered in my absence. My junior partners had done their best, but they lacked the specific blend of engineering intuition and political ruthlessness required to manage the massive civic contracts we specialized in. The library project, the glass lantern as the press was calling it, was in trouble. It was a cantilevered design, a massive glass and steel box projecting out over the harbor. The contractor, a man named DiMarco, was claiming the load calculations were off. He was pushing for additional support columns that would ruin the aesthetic of the floating structure. I arrived at the site on a Tuesday morning in November. The wind was whipping off the Atlantic, cold and salty. I wore my hard hat and my high-visibility vest, the uniform I felt most comfortable in. "Mr. Vance," DiMarco said, walking over with a roll of blueprints. He looked nervous. He was used to dealing with my deputies or with the confused Arthur Vance who signed change orders without reading them. "We got a problem with the torsion on the south elevation. The steel's gonna twist if we don't add a column at grid line 4. "Show me," I said. He laid the plans out on the hood of his truck. He started pointing at the stress diagrams, talking fast, using jargon meant to confuse a layman. I listened for 2 minutes without blinking. Then I placed my hand on the paper. "Stop," I said. "Sir, the safety margins." "The safety margins are fine, DiMarco," I said. "The problem isn't the torsion. The problem is that you ordered grade 50 steel instead of grade 65 to save on the material budget, and now you're trying to cover your ass with unnecessary columns because the lower grade steel can't take the moment connection." DiMarco went pale. That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," I said, pulling a micrometer from my pocket. "I checked the delivery manifest and I measured the flange thickness on the beams you staged over there. You're trying to value engineer my design into the ground and pocket the difference." I leaned in close. "Tear it out," I said. "Send it back, order the spec steel. If you try to pour concrete on this rebar, I will have your license pulled before the cement is dry. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mr. Vance," he whispered. "Good, and DiMarco, yes. Don't ever assume I'm not paying attention again. I have a lot of lost time to make up for." I walked away, feeling a surge of adrenaline that was purer than any drug. This was who I was. I was the man who understood how things stood up. I was the man who caught the flaws before the collapse. But as I drove back to the office, the triumph faded into a dull ache. I could fix a building. I could reinforce a retaining wall. But I couldn't retrofit the 20 years of parenting that had produced Julian and Kara. I had engineered their lives, hadn't I? I had smoothed the roads for them. I had removed the obstacles. When Julian failed explicitly in college, I made a donation. When Kara got a DUI, I hired the best lawyer. I had applied the same principle to them as I did to my buildings. Prevent stress, distribute the load, ensure stability. But people aren't buildings. By removing the stress, I had removed the strength. I had built them without a foundation. They were decorative facades, beautiful to look at but unable to bear the weight of a moral life. The guilt was a cold companion. It sat in the passenger seat of my car. Was it my fault? Did I create the monsters that tried to devour me? I reached out to Dr. Thorne again, not for my brain but for my mind. We met for coffee, not as doctor and patient, but as two men who had seen the darker side of human nature. You can't engineer a soul, Arthur, Thorne told me. Sociopathy, narcissism. Sure, environment plays a part, but some people are just wired wrong, and some people are corrupted by the very cushion you provided. But you didn't hand them the pills. You didn't write the fake affidavit. They made choices, adult choices. It feels like a failure, I admitted. My greatest project, and it collapsed. It didn't collapse, Thorne corrected. You demolished it before it could kill you. There's a difference. December came, bringing snow to Boston. The city turned white and gray. I hadn't heard from them. The restraining order was specific, no contact, direct or indirect. But Boston is a small city, and the gravitational pull of a father's anxiety is strong. I broke my own rule. I hired a private investigator, not to harass them, but to know. I needed to know if they were starving. I needed to know if they were plotting again. The report arrived a week later. Manila envelope on my mahogany desk. Kara was living in an apartment in Revere near the airport. It was a walk-up. She was working as a hostess at a chain restaurant in Saugus. Her real estate license had been suspended pending the ethics investigation. The report included a photo of her smoking a cigarette outside the restaurant's back door, looking tired, her makeup harsh under the security lights. Julian was in worse shape. He was staying on a friend's couch in Alston. He was trying to launch a cryptocurrency consulting firm, which was just a fancy way of saying he was unemployed and hustling on Twitter. I stared at the photos. My children, the heirs to the Vance fortune. I opened my checkbook. I wrote a check for $10,000. I stared at it. Just to help them get settled, the voice in my head whispered, just so they don't freeze. Then I remembered the sound of the scotch pouring. Glug, glug, glug. I remembered the discussion about the memory care unit. You won't even know where he is. I remembered the blue and yellow pills swirling in the toilet bowl. I ripped the check in half, then I ripped the halves. I put the photos in the shredder. If I helped them now, I would simply be resetting the cycle. I would be proving to them that there are no permanent consequences, that Daddy will always fix it. Sink or swim, I whispered to the empty room. For the first time in your lives, you have to swim. It was shortly after Christmas that I decided to sell the house. The Beacon Hill brownstone was a masterpiece of 19th century architecture. High ceilings, crown moldings, the wainscoting I had pressed my back against while listening to my own murder being planned. It was beautiful and I hated it. Every corner held a ghost. The kitchen where a leaner used to make risotto. The study where the betrayal happened. The stairs where I had fallen and they had claimed I was unstable. It was a museum of a life that no longer existed. I called a competitor's real estate firm to list it. I didn't want Kara to even hear a rumor of the commission. You want to sell? Robert Sterling asked me over lunch. Arthur, you've lived there for 30 years. It's your history. It's a mausoleum, I said, echoing the word Kara had used. She was right about that at least. I'm living in a crypt. I need light, Bob. I need open space. I bought a penthouse in the seaport in one of the buildings I had engineered. It was all glass, steel, and light. It looked out over the harbor towards the horizon. It had no wainscoting. It had no dark corners. It was a blank slate. The move was cathartic. I took only the things that mattered, Eleanor's jewelry which I placed in a safe deposit box, her favorite books, my drafting table. The rest I sold or auctioned. On the final day, walking out of the brownstone, I paused in the hallway, the spot where I had stood. I imagined the two of them there, Julian and Kara, glasses raised. Goodbye, I said, not to the house but to the version of Arthur Vance who had been a victim. He died here. The man walking out the door was someone else. Asterisk 6 months turned into a year. The Glass Lantern Library opened to critical acclaim. I stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the mayor shaking my hand. A triumph of engineering, the mayor said, a symbol of transparency. I looked out at the crowd. And then I saw him, Julian. He was standing at the back of the crowd outside the VIP rope line. He looked older. He had lost the soft, pampered look of the country club. He was wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit right. He looked hungry. Our eyes locked across the sea of heads. He took a step forward, raising a hand, a tentative wave, a plea. "Look at me, Dad, I'm here, I showed up." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a structural stress test. The load was immense. He was my son. I looked at him. I saw the little boy who used to catch fireflies. I saw the teenager who crashed the car. I saw the man who poured poison down my throat and laughed about it. I didn't wave. I didn't frown. I simply looked at him with the neutral, analytical gaze I used for inspecting concrete. I acknowledged his existence, and I acknowledged that he was no longer part of my structure. I turned back to the mayor and smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We built it to last." When I looked back a minute later, Julian was gone. That night in my new apartment, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Arthur Vance," I answered. "Mr. Vance, this is Detective Miller from the Revere Police Department." My stomach dropped. "Yes, we have a young woman here, Cara Vance. She was picked up for shoplifting at a Sephora. She's claiming you're her father and that you can post her bail." The silence on the line stretched out. The city lights of Boston twinkled below me through the floor-to-ceiling glass. "Mr. Vance, I know who she is," I said. My voice was steady. "But I think you have the wrong number. I don't have a daughter." "Sir, she's very insistent. She says—" "Officer," I cut him off. "If she broke the law, she deals with the law. Do not call me again." I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time, my hand resting on the receiver. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, harder than the detox, harder than the court case. It was an amputation. I had cut off a limb to save the body. It was necessary, but it left a phantom pain that I knew would never fully go away. I stood up and walked to the window. The reflection in the glass showed a man with gray hair, straight posture, and eyes that were clear and sharp. I wasn't happy. Happiness is a simple emotion suitable for children and golden retrievers. I was something more complex. I was resilient. I was free. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. No scotch tonight. I didn't need the numbing. I wanted to feel the sharp edge of the reality I had fought so hard to reclaim. I walked into my study, sat at my drafting table, and turned on the lamp. The clean white paper waited for me. I picked up my pencil. There was a new project on the horizon, a bridge, a suspension bridge spanning a gorge in New Hampshire. It required a delicate balance of tension and compression. It needed to be flexible enough to withstand the wind, but rigid enough to carry the weight. I touched the pencil to the paper. The graphite made a soft scritch sound. I drew a line. Straight, true, unwavering. I was alone, but I was building. And that, I realized, was more than enough. The line on the paper was thin, gray, and decisive. A bridge is an act of faith made manifest in steel, a promise that you can get from one side of a precipice to the other without falling. But as I sketched the anchorage points for the main cables, I understood why I had chosen this specific project. It was an exercise in spanning a void that could not be filled. The gorge in New Hampshire was deep, rocky, and ancient, much like the chasm that had opened up between my past and my present. I could build a structure to cross the granite valley, yet I possessed no blueprint to traverse the silence that now defined my family. That was a span too wide, the winds of resentment too high. Some gaps, physics dictates, are simply too vast to be bridged. My mind drifted back to a summer evening in 1998. Elena and I were sitting on the porch of the Vineyard House. Julian was 10, throwing a tantrum because we hadn't bought him the specific brand of sneakers he wanted. Cara was 6, quietly cutting the heads off her dolls with safety scissors. I had laughed it off then, calling it spirit. Elena had looked at me, her eyes troubled over the rim of her wine glass. "Arthur," she had said, "you treat their happiness like a problem to be solved with a checkbook. You're depriving them of the struggle." I hadn't listened. I thought my job was to be the load-bearing wall that protected them from the elements. I didn't realize that by sheltering them so completely, I was preventing them from developing their own internal bracing. I had engineered their weakness. The guilt was a dull ache, a hairline fracture in my own foundation, but I knew now that it couldn't be repaired. It could only be monitored. The pencil moved rhythmically. Scritch, scritch, pause. In the silence of the seaport penthouse, I found a strange kind of companionability with the night. Down below, the city of Boston breathed, a network of lights, traffic, and millions of tiny, interconnected dramas. I was no longer a participant in the chaotic opera of parenting or the desperate hustle of social climbing. I was an observer, a guardian of the skyline. My legacy would not be a dynasty of spoiled heirs spending my money on fleeting pleasures. My legacy would be in the steel and glass. It would be in the library where a child learned to read, in the office tower where a business was born, and in this bridge where travelers would cross safely over the abyss, unaware of the man who had calculated the tension in the cables. There is a peace in knowing exactly what you are. I'm not a father anymore, not in the way that matters. I'm not a husband. I'm a structure that survived a demolition attempt. The tremors had stopped. The dust had settled. I looked at the drawing one last time. The geometry was perfect. The logic was sound. It would hold. I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness save for the ambient glow of the harbor. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. I was simply ready for the morning. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a year, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt complete. I had reinforced the walls. I had secured the foundation. I was standing, and I was unbroken.